traffic police officers were directing traffic one moment, but the next, they had their guns pointed at themselves. Just after the police officer fell down, taxi driver looked dumbfounded out of the car, stooped down to pick up the pistol on the ground, also chose to kill themselves. Not only that, even passersby took slow, deliberate steps forward to pick up the dropped firearms. On the other side of the construction site, a few workers are chatting, but suddenly, their smiles disappeared and they rushed forward to check the condition of the workers and called for an ambulance. However, one crisis followed another. With a loud crash, another worker fell heavily to the ground. Before they could recover from their shock, their fellow workers from upstairs began jumping down as well. The man's horrified gaze turned upwards to witness an even more horrifying scene.
Oddio mio.
Biology professor Elliot was in the middle of a class when he was summoned by the school principal. Terrorists had launched an attack in Central Park, releasing a chemical gas. For the safety of the students, the school had to temporarily suspend classes. At that moment, people hadn't yet grasped the gravity of the situation. They believed it was just a simple attack. Elliot just got home and found out on the news that not only the school, but the entire city of New York is being evacuated because the gas can cause hallucinations and lead to self-harming behavior. So, Elliot decided to pack his bags and take his wife Alma to the train station. They planned to seek refuge several hundred kilometers away in Philadelphia with the mathematics teacher Julian and his daughter Jess. Little did they know that just after they boarded the train, a similar incident unfolded in a park in Philadelphia. As an eerie breeze swept through the park, people suddenly froze in place. When the woman saw this scene, she wanted to tell her best friend, but she found that her friend suddenly went into a trance, and then slowly took the hairpin from her head and stuck it into her neck without hesitation. Soon, passengers on the train saw the news of the crisis unfolding in Philadelphia on their smartphones. Not only that, but several surrounding cities were also not spared. The train carriage descended into chaos, but not long after the train departed, it suddenly came to a stop in a small town. Elliot approached the train conductor to inquire about the situation, only to be told that this was the final destination because they had lost contact with everyone else. They had no choice but to rest at a small restaurant in town. In the restaurant, a lady was watching a video at a Philadelphia zoo. A zookeeper inexplicably angered a lion, and the man seemed to defy the pain until the lion brutally devoured him. The sight sent shivers down everyone's spine. However, the news reports stated that this wasn't a terrorist attack. It was a virus that spread through the air. The infection had already spread throughout the entire northeastern United States, and they were right in the heart of the affected area. It appeared their only option was to head west. Just then the lights in the restaurant suddenly went out and people realized that sooner or later they would get infected if they stayed there. They rushed out of the restaurant, got into their cars, and sped away. Elliot had hoped to hitch a ride with someone, but in their frantic escape, no one was willing to help. Luckily, the last person to leave, a nursery owner, agreed to assist them. However, Julian approached Elliot in a state of panic, informing him that he had lost contact with his wife and needed to take a separate vehicle to Princeton, because Julian's wife was disconnected at Princeton, with only one spot left in the other vehicle. Julian entrusted his daughter Jess to Elliot. After a heartfelt farewell, Julian departed. Little did Julian know that this would be the last time he'd see his daughter. As they arrived in Princeton, they were greeted by a horrifying sight. Countless corpses hanging from the trees, all of them infected with the virus and committing suicide. It was evident that this place had already fallen. Julian hastily blocked the vehicle's ventilation to prevent outside air from getting in, but soon Julian realized something was wrong. He looked up and saw a hole in the roof of the car. Just as Julian began to sense danger, the vehicle abruptly stopped and then accelerated directly into a tree in front of them. The others were killed instantly, but only Julian slowly got out of the car. But it wasn't long before Julian picked up the broken glass on the ground and cut his wrist. At the same time, Elliot and his group also witnessed the highway littered with the bodies of suicide victims. They were about to take another route when they spotted a military vehicle approaching. Soldier Oster hurriedly approached them, explaining that their military base was up ahead but had also fallen. None of his comrades had survived. Just then, a few more vehicles approached from two other nearby roads. After some inquiries, they all reported finding the bodies of suicide victims not far away. It seemed this was the only safe place left. Soon the survivors are gathering. In a crowd, A woman received a call from Princeton, but the situation was far from optimistic. She hadn't spoken more than a few words when the news on the other end turned grim.
Christian! Stacy!
Elliot took the phone and heard nothing but the sound of the wind. It seems that Julian, who was traveling to Princeton, was in a bad way. Elliot could only hug Jess and cry. Meanwhile, the nursery owner proposed a daring theory from the sidelines, suggesting that this might all be due to plants. Some plants, when under attack by insects, release a toxic chemical as a defense mechanism. But regardless, this was no place to linger. Oster suggested that since the virus had erupted from the city, it seemed safer in less populated areas. So, Oster proposed heading to a nearby village, where there were places to stay but few people. With unanimous agreement, they split into two groups. Elliot led a small group ahead, with Oster and the larger group following closely. But as a strange wind swept through, the people in front suddenly stopped in their tracks. Oster, too, stood still and uttered some peculiar words before pulling out a gun and aiming it at himself. Elliot and his team turned around and heard more gunshots. Clearly, they had all been infected by the virus. At this point, Professor Elliot speculated that the virus was not only linked to plants but also to the number of people. Whenever humans gathered, it triggered the virus. Perhaps human activity made plants feel threatened, causing them to release the toxic substance. Unexpectedly, as he finished speaking, a strange wind blew in the distance. To prove his point, they immediately split up and fled. Soon, the airy wind reached them. Elliot and his group stopped in their tracks. After a few minutes, they remained unaffected, confirming Elliot's hypothesis. The virus was only released when there were many people around. They then found a house and retrieved a map, preparing to head to a sparsely populated area. But soon a large number of survivors came towards the house. To avoid clustering, they quickly left. Not long after leaving, they saw two groups of survivors converging. Due to their large numbers, they became infected by the virus. One man chose the most brutal way to end his life, starting a large lawnmower on the lawn and lying down in front of it. Elliot and his group were terrified and fled. As they passed a house, they decided to go inside to find supplies. Elliot found the door tightly shut, assuming someone was inside. He knocked, but there was no response. However, Jared clearly saw a figure inside. Elliot called out loudly, requesting some food, but the person inside was afraid they might bring the virus in and chose to refuse. After a fruitless attempt, Elliot wanted to leave, but a cranky Josh curses and kicks at the door, yelling at him to open it. Jared was also banging on the window. This reckless behavior enraged the person inside, who extended a gun through the door crack and shot Josh dead without hesitation. Elliot hadn't even recovered from the shock when he saw the gun aimed at Jared. All I can say is, in these end times, people are capable of anything for self-preservation. But luckily, the owner of the house didn't kill them. Elliot and his group hurriedly fled and arrived at another house. After all, filling their stomachs was a priority. Luckily, the homeowner here seemed friendly and invited them to join for dinner. In this post-apocalyptic world, people like this are either kind-hearted or sick. Sure enough, during dinner, they noticed that something was off with Mrs. Jones. One moment she was laughing and chatting, and the next, she flew into a rage. Elliot and Alma exchanged uneasy glances but decided not to say much. As it was getting late, they had no choice but to stay overnight. Thankfully, everything was normal during the night. When Elliot woke up and went downstairs, he noticed a partially open door, which piqued his curiosity. To his surprise, lying on the bed was not Mrs. Jones but a cute Barbie doll. It seemed that Mrs. Jones was not only eccentric but also a bit twisted. At that moment, Mrs. Jones suddenly appeared behind Elliot and began questioning him as if she had gone mad, asking if he intended to steal something. Elliot tried to explain, but Mrs. Jones yelled at him to leave immediately and then headed outside. Elliot had just followed Mrs. Jones outside when he realized that a strong wind was blowing around him. Mrs. Jones' behavior became increasingly bizarre. Elliot realized the situation and went back to the house and closed the door. But Mrs. Jones was infected with a virus and she started banging on the window. The windows shattered, and the wind blew in. It seemed that plants were becoming more sensitive, and even a single person could trigger the release of the virus. Elliot had no choice but to retreat into the kitchen and started searching for Alma and Jess. Finally, through a window, Elliot spotted Alma and Jess playing in a nearby warehouse. Although they were a bit far away, A clear pipe allowed them to communicate. Elliot urgently told Alma to close the windows and informed her that the virus released by the plants seemed to have become stronger. It appeared that they couldn't escape the fate of succumbing to it. Rather than waiting to die alone, they decided to face it together. So, Elliot opened the door resolutely and walked out. Seeing this, Alma and Jess come out and walk towards Elliot, but to their surprise, a strange wind swept through, and none of them exhibited any unusual symptoms. Miraculously, they came together unscathed. Elliot guessed that the attack of the plants had stopped, so they were lucky to survive. Several months later, the city returned to normal. Elliot and Alma adopted Jess, forming a complete family. Everything was looking up. Experts in the news confirmed that the attack had indeed been caused by neurotoxins released by plants. These plants sensed a threat from humans and released the toxin for self-preservation. However, it lasted only a day and occurred exclusively in the northeastern United States. It was like a warning from nature. If humans continued their relentless destruction of the Earth's ecology, tragedy could strike again. Sure enough, just a few days later, in a serene and peaceful park, another dreadful event unfolded.